name's Rebecca Tan, this is Making LARP, and this week we're going to be talking all about problems and solutions. In today's video I'm going to talk about some of the main problems you will encounter in a LARP game. Now the first four I consider to be problems that you can encounter in any LARP game of any size, of any type, and in fact some of the terms actually derive from tabletop games, so they're not new, but you may find that they manifest more strongly in a LARP scenario. The second type are those that I believe to be specific to event LARP, and so I'll cover them later on in the video. So the first four problems I kind of group together as mostly to do with the nature of LARP and a good LARP being a very intense and dramatic experience, especially when compared to tabletop. Due to LARP being quite an intense roleplay experience, people often find more difficulty distinguishing between actions taken against them and actions taken against their character. In a tabletop setting, if something someone does upsets you as you rather than your character, it's quite easy for yourself or the GM to take that other person aside and have a chat with them in a neutral, out of character environment and air those grievances. In LARP, you may find that this is more difficult to do. As you have more people, you may have to wait quite a while till that person is available to talk to you, by which point it's quite difficult to not let those actions bubble up and become even bigger and bigger in your mind. For this reason, I consider the first problem with LARP, and a problem that most of us will encounter at some point in time, is either ourselves or those around us being offended or upset by actions taken for purely in-character reasons. Now, the best solution to this is always to go and have a chat with the person involved out of character as soon as possible, so that both you can clear the air and ensure that any problems are smoothed over. If this isn't possible at the event, there are many forms of online communication and other messages that you might have to be able to get in touch with the person and just make sure that they know no hard feelings, or check in yourself if you are feeling like perhaps things were taken in a bad way or actions taken against you were done for reasons you don't think were entirely in character. Now, most of the time it's simply going to be a case of an intense moment and it being nothing personal. Very occasionally you will find that people just don't get on. Now, it may be that the actions taken against you are malicious and for out of character reasons, or it may just be that there's just not a gelling between you and that person, and that makes it harder for them to gel with your character. Well, more accurately, for their character to gel with your character. In the other extreme, where it's not a disagreement or an antagonistic action taken against you, another thing that people find hard to deal with in LARP, where the emotional stakes are that much higher, are relationship interactions. By this I mean if your character or the character of someone you are in out of character relationship with becomes involved in an in-character relationship with somebody else. It could be that you are both, as players, happily single, and that mixed messages could come about because people are taking things that you are saying and doing in character to a place out of character. Now again, most of this can all be resolved with discussions out of character and just making sure everyone's in the same headspace, that there's no hard feelings. Now, unfortunately, due to the nature of people, you may need to take a step back and decide between yourselves out of character that actually the relationship in character is not going to work, because either it's upsetting yourself, upsetting the other person, or it's upsetting a significant other. And it can be very difficult to know that this is going to happen beforehand. Emotional reactions being what they are, you may find that this is something where, again, someone has the reaction, perhaps over the course of an event, doesn't feel it's appropriate to talk about at the event, and between however many parties are involved, a decision is made in what would be normally considered downtime that we need to come to a resolution where this plot line, this interaction ends. Now, if for any reason you do feel that another party has not got the message and you felt the need to stop a interaction for out-of-character reasons, then the next step is through whatever proper official channels you've got, because then it's bordering on the lines of creepy behaviour from a player rather than from a character. And so you might need to get official involvement of the plot team or whatever body is responsible for those sort of things in character. For example, you might have an out-of-character leader that deals with people's out-of-character interactions. You might have another sort of appropriate role that's more appropriate than your ST. That would depend entirely on your own game. But in the most case, interaction level issues are best dealt with between the people involved, out of character if at all possible. Of course, the flip side of being too strongly in character and it causing emotional responses is people around you being not strongly enough in character. Now, depending on the setup of your system and the style of game you're at, it may be that there are designated out-of-character areas or out-of-character times at an event where people are interacting out of character whilst other people are interacting in character. This causes two main problems. The first being those that are interacting in character. Now, as long as this interaction is happening during sanctioned time, or perhaps if time out was being called, you've gone to a private space in order to have that interaction, then as long as a quick out-of-character message to someone intruding going, look, we're trying to be in character, can you give us 5 minutes, should generally solve most problems. However, it is worth noting that especially at event LARPs, it can be difficult to maintain your character for long periods of time. It can be as simple as you've got up late and timing has already happened and you need to be getting ready inside a tent where people are interacting in character. And so these are sort of things that you have to deal with, and try and do it with as much care as possible to not spoil the fun of other people. And again, if you feel that your fun in character is being spoiled by another person, generally having a quick word out of character and asking them to leave the area is the most appropriate response. Or if it's perhaps several people getting changed, going and taking your IC conversation somewhere else whilst everyone else finishing getting ready. Most systems will have some sort of signal to denote when someone is out of character but happens to be walking through an IC area. In most systems I've played in, it's generally been holding a hand up in the air. Now, in something like Vampire, there may be additional symbols or restriction on that. For example, one finger means that you're travelling out of character. 3 fingers might mean that you're using a particular skill that allows your character to be invisible, or to be using additional senses or some other method of how they are actually listening to your in-character conversation, and that therefore the using of a different symbol, though similar, to denote that they aren't there where you can see them, gives you the opportunity in character to discover they are there or listening in and moderate your behaviour accordingly. Of course, that then leads on to the other main problem with people interacting in character and out of character at the same time. Now, this isn't a new thing, but the term comes from tabletop and it's metagaming. Metagaming, most simply, is using out of character information to benefit your character. So an example I just gave, where you're seeing an out of character symbol that someone is watching you in character, if you were to simply moderate what you're saying with no in-character prompt to do so, that would be metagaming. That would be using out-of-character information you've gained from seeing the symbol in order to give a benefit or do damage to something that another character is trying to do in character. But if, for example, a person was walking through the room gesturing that they were out of character, and then you use the information that they had gained from hearing your conversation as their character when they timed in, that would be them metagaming. Metagaming is something that's very upsetting to a lot. It's not something that most people consciously do. Perhaps there is some confusion. Someone is having a in-character or in-character-ish conversation whilst you're there in character, then dropping into out-of-character conversation and dropping back into in-character conversation, and you don't realise that the out-of-character conversation part was out of character, or that you don't realise they've gone back to saying something and making plans in character, and it can cause a lot of upset and drama. You do occasionally get people that are metagaming on purpose. Again, if that's the case, then you need to deal with it by going to the appropriate authorities within your system. If you can't come to a resolution that makes both parties happy out of character, for example, you could say, look, you shouldn't have known that in character, especially if there's a new player, giving them a warning, you shouldn't have known that in character. This symbol means you weren't there. I wouldn't have said that if I'd known you were listening in character. What you're doing is metagaming, please don't do it again. And then if it keeps happening, obviously get the appropriate authorities involved. Now, for the most serious infractions of metagaming, where it's just pure out and out cheating, there has been known to be people banned from the game. The most egregious examples of this are going into out of character areas because you know that you are targeted in character, or in a system that allows it, purposely going and somehow being a different character if it allows you to play more than one character, or going and playing in the monster room all day because you've heard there's a hit out on you. That very much goes to the end of you're doing that to save your character, not because you need to do that for some other out of character reason. That then is very definitely cheating, and it has been known for people to be instantly banned for doing that. In fact, before my time, a large group of my own faction did that. They were heads of the faction, and there was going to be a coup, and they all ran off to an out of character area and basically got told don't come back. Again, if it's someone that does it on purpose, does it repeatedly, for example, you could be having a fight with another character and they purposely go across the line to where it's out of character and you can't fight. Hopefully you will have a ref with you at the time if there is combat going on who can adjudicate and tell them to stop dicking around. But that's the sort of thing where you need to get authorities involved and let them deal with the appropriate response. The last and probably most annoying out of character type of problem we would experience in LARP is called Rawls Luring. Now this is something that happens in tabletop games. It's in fact a stereotype of a type of player that is very fixated on the rules, on the mechanics, on the crunchy numbers that make a world tick. And for some people that is a huge part of a game and what really makes it enjoyable. But for most of us, we're here to interact with other people, and especially in non-contact LARPs where combat is something that is mediated and this can potentially take a long time, someone arguing for 10-20 minutes with a ref about whether they can do an action that they wanted to do and checking through the rules and otherwise extending that period before people can time back in can get very irritating. Again, sometimes referees, storytellers, whatever you're calling them, make the wrong decision. And if it's a decision that's life or death for your character, it's very understandable to get worked up about it. But at the end of the day, it's a game. Hopefully, if a storyteller's made a wrong call and the situation can be dealt with amicably after the combat has finished, you can come to some sort of resolution. Unfortunately, if your character has died, that may be more or less difficult depending on how the scene is played out. But most systems will have some sort of rule in place that basically says the referee's decision is final. It's not out of maliciousness, it's not out of any kind of bias against your character. Sometimes people make mistakes. Now if you are in a situation where another player around you is attempting to rules lawyer, is attempting to get something resolved, my best advice is be patient. While it can feel like it's weighing down a game, while it can be irritating to you as a player, for them, if it is a very important situation, especially when it comes to whether their character lives or dies or certain major action succeeds, try and be empathetic to the fact that this is something that's very important to them. If it's a more low threat situation, as long as you're not getting the situation where 10, 15 people are piling on one person, which can feel very intimidating if they're trying to argue their case, the best thing you can do is just maybe throw some ideas out of how we can get to a resolution that everyone's happy with. Because what ultimately everybody wants is for the game to go back into time in, so you can continue enjoying yourself. And you want everyone to walk out of it being happy, out of character, about what's just happened. So those are the kind of generic LARP problems. In the end, most of them come down to hashing it out of character, talking through your problems, and if something persists or is at a level you can't handle, getting the appropriate other people involved. When it comes to event-specific problems, there are really two main types. There are emergencies, which honestly come down to whatever reaction you would need to do to deal with an emergency. Whether that's an emergency on site, whether that's receiving news that means you have to leave the site urgently, as far as possible, everyone around you is going to be supported. If it's a first aid or a fire injury, generally there'll be systems in place for people to radio in, for people to get help to you. Just, hopefully you've been going around with at least one other person, get them to get help if you need it. If it's an off-site emergency, for example, you've checked your voicemails and you need to leave the site because a child is sick or a relative's had an accident, as long as you've got the methods to get off-site and it's not a particularly bad time, you're probably going to be alright with whatever you need to do to go deal with that. It's unfortunate, but these things do happen, and generally everyone's going to be pretty considerate about it. Now, your more low-level problems with event LARP kind of fall into two categories. You've got managing your expectations and you've got not actually injuring yourself. This is fairly important, and it's something that people do every event. Now, I don't just mean getting yourself hit in a combat and taking a concussion or other sort of injuries. They do happen. They're hopefully avoidable if everyone's pulling their blows properly, and any combat is going to have at least one referee involved, so if something does happen, there'll be a first aid team that can come respond. What's more of an issue is appropriate self-care. Now, the British weather is very changeable, and especially over the summer when it is a hot event and therefore you've got clear skies, that means it's going to be a really cold night. And every year there are people that get themselves dehydrated or sunburned or otherwise get themselves too drunk or too cold. Once the cold starts kicking in, they've been wearing shorts and t-shirt all day because it's that hot. As I mentioned in the costuming, layers are your friend here. Also, it's really useful if you have packed things with you, like tea, coffee, soup, things that you can have someone quickly boil a kettle over the camping stove, or you can go down to the traders with a bit of money, get some hot food, get some hot drink in you so your body temperature doesn't drop too much. During the daytime, make sure you're drinking plenty of water, especially if you're going to be running around. Try and keep an eye out on your friends, and hopefully they'll keep an eye out on you. If you make sure everyone around you is behaving appropriately, they remember to eat. which can be very difficult if you are a character that has lots of demands on your time. It can be very difficult to find the time to sit and have an hour to do your cooking, to sit there and eat it where it's not interrupted by combat. And at some point you do have to sit back and say, I can't deal with this, I need to take care of myself. If there's people who want to talk to me, they can talk to me whilst I'm cooking. But if you are in a situation, for example, where you've got a pan on the stove and you can't leave the tent because there'd be no one in to look after it, but there's a combat going on outside, generally there are systems in place. So that if the monsters kill everybody else or knock them out or whatever, and they'd come after you, you just say, it's dangerous to have a fight in here, there's a hot stove, I will take the hits and we'll deal with it when we need to. Again, you probably won't be suitable to just lie down on the ground bleeding out in this situation, but if you would be dying, there's probably going to be a ref there. They're probably going to have a stopwatch to do your 10-minute count or your 4-minute count or whatever it is in your system, and things can be worked on from there. The last other issue was managing expectations. We've all done it. If you go into an event with too many things to do, you won't do them all. It's unavoidable. Combat happens. Maybe you need to talk to a certain character and they die. You need to be able to accept out of character that these are your character's goals, and as many of them as they achieve, great, fantastic, wonderful for them. You need to be able to enjoy your event regardless of whether these things happen. Sometimes they'll be impossible for in-character reasons, sometimes they'll be impossible for out-of-character reasons. It might simply be that the person you want to talk to is right at the other end of the field and you just can't get that chance to meet up and deal with things properly, and you just have to leave it for another time. So I hope I've given you some good advice and I've highlighted some of the main problems you might encounter at a LARP event. In the end, you're there to have fun, and everything you can do to make sure you ensure you have fun and that those around you have fun is going to make the event better for everybody.